Okay, this is part 18, the Synagogue of Satan, Footprints in History. We've seen the fall of Byzantium, and again, the only ones that seemed to benefit were the Papacy and the Venetians, so I'll continue with more of their actions. The Papacy wasted little time after the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks. It declared a crusade, but no one was interested. Apparently, in association with this crusade and to reclaim absolute papal authority, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Romanus Pontifex in 1455. Stemming from the earlier bull Unum Sanctum, Romanus Pontifex was a trust that gave all rights to the use of land as real property to the papacy, creating crown lands, and this was put into effect by a Sestui KV trust that deprived a child from all rights to land at birth. That year, war still threatened between English and French kings. It was avoided in France, but civil war broke out in England called the Wars of the Roses. Most history books will claim that the white and red roses represented factions of English nobility in the Civil War, but some say that the red rose actually represented the Rosicrucians or the Order of Zion, and the white rose represented other Templars that had split with the Order of Zion years before. So it seems that the English Civil War was really a struggle between Templars for control of England. Many Templars found refuge in Spain and Portugal. In Portugal, they just reorganized and became known as the Knights of Christ. Both the famous explorers Vasco da Gama and Prince Henry the Navigator were Knights of Christ, Prince Henry even being a Grand Master. It may very well be true that Templars had been going to the Americas centuries before Columbus, and also that some Templars had gone underground within builder guilds and became known as Freemasons. Most of Spain was unified with the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella and the end of civil war between the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, and Spain and Portugal would begin to compete in the Atlantic Ocean for exploration. Pope Sixtus IV stepped in and ended the dispute. He ratified a treaty between the two countries in 1481. This appears to be directly related to the papal bull Aeterni Regis, which was issued in the same year. This bull proclaimed what was known as the Crown of Aragon, or the Crown of Commonwealth. It represented servitude of all to the pontiff, including kings, and it was put into effect by a second Sestui KV trust, created when a child is born, and also by the sale of the birth record as a bond to a private bank. It basically condemns all flesh into service of the Pope. In 1485, the Wars of the Roses ended in England, and Henry Tudor, or Henry VII, took the throne of England. It's interesting that he was taken back to England from France out of exile by none other than Christopher Columbus, or a relative of Columbus. The wife of Columbus was Portuguese and the daughter of a former Knight of Christ. Columbus himself may have been a Knight of Christ, so either way he would have been directly associated with Knights of Christ and Portuguese explorers. An interesting note about Columbus, the standard teaching is that he was an Italian from Genoa, but there are various theories claiming that he was anything from Jewish, Spanish, Portuguese, even French or English. But there is solid evidence that he was actually Greek, and he was from the Paleologus dynasty of Constantinople. Since the Paleologus dynasty had claimed that they were from the House of David, this may be one explanation why Columbus left on his first voyage from Spain the same year that Jews were expelled from Spain. In 1492, about 160,000 Jews were expelled. As the last Muslim strongholds were eliminated from Spain, there was a widespread fervor against non-Christians in the kingdom. It's interesting that many Jews, when they were expelled from Spain, went to none other than Venice, and some also went to Turkey, to the port of Salonika, which had strong ties to Venice. Sultan Mehmet had a policy of tolerance toward all religions there. In Spain, Jews that converted to Christianity were called conversos, but there was still a fear that many of them falsely converted. They would be called crypto-Jews. So the Dominicans were brought in to run the Spanish Inquisition. They had run the earlier Inquisitions of the Albigensian Crusade, but they created more problems than they solved, and those that had more sophistication and wealth could easily escape the Spanish Inquisition. Columbus would most likely carry expelled Jews to the New World, and this would follow the old dream of Bernard and the Templars of a true Jerusalem, or a New Jerusalem in the New World. This also shows a connection to Columbus and the Templars through the Knights of Christ. Columbus's ships had the Templar cross on their sails. By this time, both the kingdoms of France and England especially saw a rapid rise in wealth and population. They had rejected Italian methods of banking and turned to a nationalist form of mercantilism. They formed state currencies and national policies all controlled by the crown. Something else very hard to find in the history books is that in 1494, the nephew of the last emperor of Byzantium, Constantine XI, ceded his rights to the throne of Byzantium to Charles VIII, the King of France. At this time there was a growing rivalry between Genoa and Venice. Genoese bankers financed Spanish and Portuguese exploration, and the Venetian sailor John Cabot explored North America for England in 1497. In 1508, a series of battles began in northern Italy, with shifting alliances between Venice, Milan, Rome, the King of France, and the Holy Roman Emperor, among others. This was known as the Wars of the League of Cambrai. The city of Venice itself was threatened with destruction, and Milan shifted hands. It had remained loyal to the Holy Roman Empire of all the cities in northern Italy. Armies in the struggle were mostly mercenaries, and most of them were from Switzerland. The Venetians suffered a major military defeat to the King of France in 1509 at the Battle of Agnadello. These wars in northern Italy would continue until they officially ended in 1516, but the struggle would continue in the form of the Protestant Reformation. It's interesting that the very next year, Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses condemning several practices of the Catholic Church, and also the Ottoman Turks took Palestine from the Mamluks of Egypt. As kingdoms became more suspicious of Italian banks, Venetian and Genoese banks moved operations into Switzerland, and they would cover their activities in the confusion of the Protestant Reformation. It's important to note that Martin Luther's family were silver miners in eastern Germany, and they would no doubt have connections to the Venetians through their attempts to corner the silver market. There is clear evidence of Luther's connections to Venice. The Venetians supported Luther through their publishing houses. Georg Spalatin was one of Luther's protectors, and he was connected to the Venetian publishing house of Aldus. Much of Luther's writings are curiously similar to the writings of Cardinal Gasparo Contarini of Venice. Contarini would be very influential in dealings between Catholics and Protestants in the Protestant Reformation. Luther's main argument was the doctrine of salvation by grace alone. This has been seen as actually a Gnostic antinomian belief prominent in beliefs of the ancient Gnostic Carpocratians and later the Kabbalists. There were many Kabbalists in Venice. Luther was known to be a follower of Talmudic Jews Nicholas of Lyra and Paul of Burgos, who were from families of conversos who had supposedly converted in the 13 and 1400s. This could explain the similarity of many of Luther's doctrines to those of Kabbalists and Gnostics. What's more, Martin Luther's family used a red rose as a sort of family crest, and this could clearly connect them to the Rosicrucians. In 1537, Pope Paul III issued the papal bull Convocation, supposedly to open the Council of Trent, which concerned division in the Catholic Church. Gasparo Contarini was instrumental in the council. The bull Convocation was another trust with the real purpose of claiming so-called lost souls, lost to the papal see. In 1540, the first Sestui Act was created in England with the help of Venetians. It would use the papal bull Convocation to support the ecclesiastical authority of King Henry VIII. It's believed that authority was secretly given to the English crown to claim so-called lost souls, but it appears that the real purpose of the trust or bull was to deprive a person of any legal standing, which would be basically title to one's own soul. And this would happen when the parents would grant a baptismal or birth record to a church or registrar. The very same year the Jesuit order was founded, and none other than Venetian Cardinal Contarini helped in getting the Pope's approval for the order. The original members, including founder Ignatius Loyola, were from orders of knights like the Knights of Christ, and certainly many were really Templars. The Jesuit order would sometimes be called Los Alumbrados, or the Illuminati, and it was mostly found in Spain, Portugal, and Italy at first. Members of the order took an additional fourth vow to the usual three-part monastic vows, swearing total obedience to the Pope. There is evidence that Ignatius Loyola was a Kabbalist, and he was excommunicated for witchcraft by the Pope. The excommunication was later rescinded, and the Jesuits were tasked with fighting the Protestant Reformation for what was called the Counter-Reformation. The Jesuits were also tasked with missions around the world during the Age of Exploration, and I guess the Jesuits would reclaim so-called lost souls around the world, while the English crown would claim Protestants who were no doubt considered lost souls by the Catholic Church. I'll continue in the next part with the growing controversy between Protestants and Catholics, and also with the showdown between the Habsburgs and the King of France. Until next time.